So imagine you're in a situation where you have a friend named Dan. You and Dan go to work every day at a certain time. Let's say you got to be there by 8:30. You drive to Dan's house and you have to pick him up by 7:45 a.m. This is an agreement between you two. Every morning when you pick him up, Dan is late. In the beginning, you were understanding. Everybody's not a morning person. Everybody sometimes are not in the best mood. Something happens. You may just hit the snooze button one too many times. However, this is a consistent behavior for Dan. So one day you're picking up Dan. It's past 7:45. It's leaning on 8:15. You're upset because you guys are both going to be late for work, and you both are going to have to suffer the consequences. Now, you do take a moment to address this with Dan later on in the day, and you express to Dan how it feels, how it makes you feel when Dan chooses and decides to be late when it's time for you to pick him up. After you express how you feel to Dan, nothing changes. You continue to pick him up. Now, let's say it's you guys are going to go to work again, you and Dan, except this time it's Dan's turn to pick you up from work. You come out the house, you woke up a few minutes late, and you're about, let's say, 5 minutes late, 5-10 minutes late. So 7:45, it can be between 7:50, 7:55 that you end up coming out the door. You get into the car, Dan is upset, and he lets you know immediately he's not having it. Dan says you should have been on time. You look at Dan and say, I'm sorry, you know, I'll try to get up a little earlier next time. I won't hit the snooze button. And then you look at Dan and say, but you do this all the time. Dan then looks at you and say, take some accountability for what you've done. You're appalled at this point. You sit back. The bride is basically quiet to work. And that's the end of it basically for that day. And the cycle kind of continues. And so you're probably thinking to yourself, first of all, who's Dan to say to anybody, take some accountability? And you think in this situation, if you think of the concept, treat someone how you would like to be treated. If that was the case, you would think, okay, me picking up Dan, if Dan wants somebody to be on time when he's picked up for work, then he would think it would be a more considerate thing to do to get up early or whatever he needs to do to be on time when you or whoever's picking him up won't have to waste their time. It would be considerate of him to be on time when it's time for him to be picked up. That was not the case. So in this case, treat someone how you want to be treated is not exercised. And even when your turn comes around, you would think that someone who does this all the time would have some empathy. But Dan did not have any empathy whatsoever. He told you in that scenario to take some accountability for you not showing up to the appointed time where he was supposed to pick you up. I can see how that can be super frustrating. The issue here does not necessarily become treat people how you want to be treated, but then you have to ask yourself, how am I allowing people to treat me? So let's go back to the first situation. Dan's late every morning. You then tell him how you feel. What comes along with you telling Dan how you feel? You expect there to be changes. If you're telling Dan how you feel, also incorporate some of the changes you think will be beneficial for Dan to make. So if Dan being late makes you or brings you to feelings of frustration or anger, you could then say, I think it would be helpful for you to wake up maybe a few minutes earlier or to do this. Is this something you think you can do? If you guys can come into an agreement and Dan happens to be late again, let him know even before you guys establish that agreement, if these things are not met, if you continue to be late when it's time for me to pick you up, the consequences will be this, this, and this. Or the consequences will be whatever one thing you want to list. So This is where things can turn around. Dan comes out the house. You already expressed how you feel, and you have already stated the consequences that will take place if Dan does not come to the agreement that you guys have decided on, meaning he will do certain things to come out on time. Dan comes out late. Again, I'm unapologetic. He doesn't care. Why? Because in the past, you have always shown up. This time, one of the consequences is you will not continue to bring Dan to work. Now, do you think you will see a change or a shift in this with this implementation of change? Possibly yes, and also a possibility of no. Now, the possibility of no can be because in the past, you have always picked up Dan, even though he was always late. So his thought can be, she doesn't mean what she say. It's just a fluke. This is just a one-time thing. Maybe Dan calls you up the next day, like, hey, you forgot to pick me up. Or you didn't pick me up this morning. And then you can reiterate, no, it wasn't a mistake. When you and I had our previous discussion, I informed you that I felt this and this due to you being late every morning when it's time for me to pick you up. We agreed that the consequences would be that I would no longer pick you up if you continue to show up in this manner. You have to be firm in the boundaries that you set, and also in the consequences that you say will take place if certain behaviors continue. Now, this is a way that you can set an example of how you want people to treat you, how you allow someone to treat you, because it's one thing to say, I feel this way because you keep doing these behaviors, and yet you don't change anything else. All you did was express how you feel. That's not setting up boundaries. That's not letting people know what your standards and expectations are. Because as you see, Dan was quick to let you know, hey, you need to be on time. You need to be accountable. Because even though the whole saying treat people how you want to be treated, Dan was letting you know immediately that he doesn't want to allow you to think that it's okay for you to be late. Dan needs to take his own advice and suggestions. Yes, we know. But this is just giving an example how taking something so small in a scenario such as this can show up in other areas of your life. So it's okay to express how you feel, how someone may be treating you in a certain situation, but to also put in a plan of action, set your standards, set your expectations, so then you can say, hey, this is how I am allowing someone to show up in my life. This is what I'm accepting. This is what I'm not accepting. So hopefully this is helpful for you guys when you go forth in your relationships, on your jobs, at the school, with your children, your husband, your spouse, your friends, whoever it may be, your coworkers, and say, these are my new expectations. These are my standards. These are my boundaries. And they will not be crossed. If they are crossed, these are the consequences, and these are the actions or the results that will follow. All right? So with that said, treat people how you want to be treated, and set the standards that you want to set in place so people can know how it is that you want to be treated. All right, until next time.